Okay.
All right, so good evening, everybody, and welcome to our final exam review session. It does seem oddly early, I will say, since it is the beginning of November and our final exam is a month away. But I'll explain my reasoning and why I've scheduled it this way. One, we have Thanksgiving coming up, and that kind of took out a week, so that affected things. And of course, we've got our second part of the final exam review the week after, so that'll be close in time to the final. I do the final exam review in 2 sessions. This one tonight, and then of course one I think that week right prior to the exam. My reasoning for it is I have yet to figure out how I can adequately cover 16 weeks of material in an hour and a half review. It really can't be done, especially when you're trying to go big picture and tie all these concepts together. So and give you the opportunity to be asking questions and have your questions answered. That's a critical part of why we're here. So if you're here tonight, please take advantage of this time to ask your questions and to have them answered as best as I can. There are going to be several times in the review session tonight where I will say something to the effect of, look at this and look at this, go back and look at those PowerPoints. Some of these details I'm not going to rehash through because, one, they're in a PowerPoint. I'll just direct you back to those, or 2, we've already covered it in a prior review. What I would recommend doing for the final exam review is to look at all the test review sessions, exam 1, exam 2, and this review session that we're doing tonight and in a few weeks from now, to make sure that you have a good comprehensive view of all the material throughout the course. In this review session, I'm also going to try to kind of tie together again big picture. In the other exam reviews, I was very methodical. Administrative law, executive branch, legislative branch, very topical, right? I'm going to start jumping around because I'm trying to tie all the concepts together. I'm going to talk about what happens when an LLC is sued, right? And what kind of liability they face for contractual liability. That's tying together 3 different lectures and 3 different topics. That's, again, kind of the point of where I want to go with this review is tying all the pieces together. And because that's what you're going to see on the exam, right? It is cumulative. It's going to cover all the lectures that have been assigned, and it is going to go big picture. You're going to see more of those analytical reasoning type of questions. Did y'all feel more of those questions the second exam?
I thought it was easy.
Yeah. It's funny.
Easier.
Well, you know what? That is statistically borne out. I will tell you that, because statistically speaking, most of my students do better on the second exam than they did on the first, because there's a little lower quantity of material, fewer lectures, so a little bit less to master. I think that makes it easier on people, and it's your second exam. You have a little practice underneath your belt now, and so it's a little easier. I'll also tell you this, I do have a good number of students that statistically go down for the final. Again, because we're getting back into high volume. You've got a lot of material to cover. But I do 2 review sessions. You've got 2 weeks open for studying. You've got a lot of time open for studying and for mastery of the material. I've built a lot into the calendar. So I did that intentionally, to give y'all plenty of time to cover everything. So, you have the grades for the statutory research. You have the grades for the statutory research assignment. Goldman Sachs case study is in process with grading, and then I think you have your Hoffman versus Jones assignment coming up due in the next few days, if I recall correctly. Okay. Any questions for me about administrative issues, housekeeping? Yes.
Is the finals 50 questions, or ought to be more?
It's about 50,
Okay.
give or take. Very similar format.
Okay.
Very similar format, true, false, multiple choice, but what's going to be different is you're going to see more of those analytical reasoning type of questions than you saw before, and more what I would call fact pattern questions, which is I'm going to give you a story, a fact pattern, a hypothetical, and you're going to have to apply the legal principles to that. Yes, ma'am.
Will you release last semester or a previous version of the review session as well, in addition to this semester's? I liked hearing you go over it twice in a different way.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. I could.
There was
I don't
stuff
mind
in
doing
the
that.
in the extra version that you released. There was stuff in that one that wasn't in the one that we covered. I just found it to be
Was that
helpful.
just because the video cut off?
No.
Or
No, I was here in the
Then-
session as well.
Yeah, and then you posted because it did get cut off, and then you could pick up the summer one, and I found there was stuff.
Yeah, I listened to the whole second
Yeah.
set of them.
But I'll tell you what, that shows you the dynamic of human variable, right? Honestly, I'm working off the same set of notes.
But students ask questions and it leads into different
Absolutely.
tangents. and-
Absolutely. Some days I'm on, some days I'm off. Yeah, exactly. Different topics come up that it can be really interesting. So yeah, I'm happy to release the prior semester. I don't have a problem with that. I don't usually like to do more than that. I tell you one time I found in my YouTube analytics that people were watching in Afghanistan. Did I tell you that? Yeah, I had like several followers in like Pakistan and Afghanistan. Like, if I had
Well, if there were male followers, I'm not surprised.
I'm sorry?
If there were male followers, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that the problem was there.
I don't know. All I know is that I go over my student roster list, and I haven't seen any Pakistani or Afghan citizens, residents on my list. So I knew they were not registered in my class. I wasn't sure exactly what was going on. Yeah. Anyway, all right. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started with everything. So, again, just to reiterate briefly, we established at the beginning of class, there is that distinction between civil law and criminal law, right? As you know, as we said at the very outset of the class, the principle of civil law is disputes, or I should say the laws that govern the relationships and interactions between individuals. And when I use the term individuals, bear in mind that an individual can, in fact, be a business. Okay, I'm using that term from the sense of the fact that businesses have constitutional rights, right? Okay, so in that sense, they, so these laws that govern the rights and responsibilities that individuals have to each other, that businesses have to each other, is what is the concept of civil law. And, in the criminal law, the concept of righting the wrong is one where we are acknowledging that somebody has acted against society in such a way that they need to be punished or removed from society because they present a danger to society, right? That's why people are either fined as a deterrent type of issue for very minor actions, or imprisoned, incarcerated, in the most grievous of situations, put to death, because those actions are deemed so significant that they are a threat to stable society. Whereas in civil law, there's a recognition that certain actions can be so damaging that they have to be punished, okay, or rectified in some way. And how, as a Western society, do we believe that those wrongs should be rectified? By money. As a general, what do y'all think about that? Does money solve those ills? Rights, when an individual has been violated in some way.
I don't think money will bring back death of somebody. But if you have medical bills or you lost physical things, then yeah, sure.
Do you think that somebody who has suffered the loss of a loved one as a result of somebody's negligence deserves to be compensated for that loss of companionship and loss of affection? And there's no right answer to that. I'm just asking your opinion, really.
Well, yeah, I do. It won't bring them back, but it
Yeah.
can make their life better as a result of
At
it.
the end of the day, they still have lost that individual.
Yes.
So that doesn't change that. Does
Right.
a little bit of compensation make you feel better about that? Paying medical bills or whatever it is, maybe.
And yeah, that's the challenge with economic versus non-economic damages and tort actions. See, you can see how I'm already jumping ahead 5 lessons. But let me answer your question about that, or you had a comment?
Yeah, I kind of walked in late, but does that relate to the guy that just died, the homeless guy that died?
No.
Oh.
Although, you know, that's interesting because he's somebody who probably, you may have heard there was a homeless gentleman who frequented 39th Avenue. His name was Tommy, from what I understand. He was very well known.
Actually, he wasn't homeless.
No,
He
he's
was not.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, he had a home right there on 39.
Okay.
I lived right down the street from him for a while, yeah.
Okay.
I went to school with him.
Oh, did
so-
you?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know anything about him,
Yeah.
so then I apologize
No, I just-
being wrong about that. You know, but yeah, it's, you know, I don't think he worked.
No.
So, somebody like Tommy might not be able to blackboard, so to speak, term the lawyers use, solid economic damages for his loss. If he didn't have a family or if he didn't have children and didn't have a job, there's not, you know, you can't say that there's future lost wages, for example, or financial loss to his dependents as a result of his death. Those economic damages aren't there. Did his family suffer as a result, are suffering as a result of the loss of their family member by, you know, this motor vehicle, the driver's actions in hitting him as a pedestrian? Of course. You know, absolutely. How do we put a dollar value on those? That's the jury question. We're actually going to, I don't want to go too much into that because I actually have lots of good examples and meaty stuff for torts because you know I love that. So I'll get some through some other of the stuff and then we'll dive back into that in more detail. But let's just go over very briefly, you know, for some of these first few concepts that were at the beginning of the semester, I'm really just going to kind of focus on what I call sticky points, things that I noticed in the exam were questions that students consistently missed. So we'll go over those just to make sure that y'all are clear on it. The branches of government, you know, just keep in mind, again, when we're going big picture here, the concept of checks and balances between the various different branches, how the different branches of government have checks and balances on each other. I often use the example of an executive order as an example of kind of an exception to the checks and balances. And in many ways it is. The president has wide latitude to issue an executive order without seeking permission or validation from Congress. Okay. Otherwise, you know, laws, legislation that the president might want are enacted by Congress. You know, he might have members of his party. I'm just using the term he because we currently have a male president, but, you know, have members of the party submit bills to Congress that he would sign. Okay? But ultimately, it is Congress's job, right, to write the laws and to enact those laws. Of course, we know that executive orders are not completely immune from, you know, there's not completely undiscretion. I'm tripping over my own tongue. Doesn't have completely unfettered discretion. We can look, for example, to just the last few executive orders that President Trump issued kind of at the outset of his presidency, which were challenged by temporary restraining orders in multiple federal district courts as it pertained to immigration orders. Okay? And some of those orders were in fact upheld. So that's an example of checks and balances on executive orders. But as a general rule, you know, keep in mind the president does indeed have wide latitude to enact executive orders, and that's what that's a little bit of an exception to the general rule on checks and balances. Okay. The issue of jurisdiction when we get into the judiciary is something I want y'all to be very, very familiar with. Let's start first with the federal system. The federal system, as you know, at the trial, so we're going to start at the trial level. Okay? At the trial level, there are two different ways that you can bring an action in federal court. What are the two different modes of jurisdiction, ways that a federal court might have jurisdiction?
Which one's David?
Certain amount of money that he's
That's an element of it,
Constitutional question.
See, this is why I go over it, because I know these are challenges. These are good ones to go over if people aren't real solid on it. Two different ways you can get in. If you have a federal question jurisdiction, or alternatively, diversity jurisdiction. Federal question,
What's the
yes.
second one?
Diversity jurisdiction. Federal question jurisdiction is relatively straightforward. If you have a federal statute which you allege has been violated, that is calling a federal statute into question, the application, the enforcement, what have you. That is a federal question that the federal courts can hear. In the business context, what are some of the most common federal question type of cases that we see or involving federal question jurisdiction? Employment. Okay. Issues pertaining to employment discrimination, based on race, age, gender, sex, harassment claims, equal employment opportunity. The biggest one that comes to my mind immediately are employment cases. Again, when I'm looking at this from a business perspective, okay, business owner, manager, employee's perspective in federal court. Doesn't matter how much is at issue. Doesn't matter if somebody alleges that they have $100 worth of damages or $10 million worth of damages. If you're alleging that a federal statute has been violated, oh, by the way, I shouldn't just be saying federal statute. Constitutional issues, okay? Federal constitutional issues are also examples. If you're claiming that a federal constitutional right has been violated, that's also something that would fall within federal question jurisdiction, okay? All right, the other pathway to get into federal court is a little bit more difficult, and that is what is known as diversity jurisdiction. Diversity jurisdiction requires two things. It requires an action between citizens of two different states and damages in excess of $75,000. Okay. This gets very complicated when you start talking about businesses, because then you get into the residency of the business. Where is what's the principal place of business for the company? Where are they doing business? Where are they incorporated? Things like that. It can get to be a sticky question of where a business is doing business sometimes, especially in today's age of very advanced technologies. But in any event, there has to be diversity of citizenship. So a citizen of Florida suing a citizen of Alabama, a citizen of Georgia suing a citizen of Tennessee, whatever. There cannot be two citizens of the same state on both sides. A citizen of Florida suing a citizen of Florida. What gets complicated, and like when you go forward into our litigation process, is when you have multiple defendants on one side, which is very, very common in business litigation, that multiple businesses, multiple individuals, multiple entities are sued. If any of those entities either have a different place of incorporation or different principal place of business or doing business in different locations, or where the site of the incident occurred, there can be some real questions about citizenship for purposes of assessing diversity jurisdiction. And there must be damages in excess of $75,000. Okay. So those are the two requirements. If there's damages of $50,000, it's not going to be enough. It's got to be $75,000 at least in damages in order to be heard as part of diversity jurisdiction. Does that make sense, everybody? There's a whole PowerPoint slide on it. There's probably a very long and exhaustive lecture by me on it, on that PowerPoint. So just please make sure you go back over that, because those questions were commonly missed on the exam.
I did have a question, because I had a problem with that question
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
exam. And the language sort of implied that it could either be one or the other. And I was like, no, it has to be both. But
Right.
I couldn't discern the answer from that.
Yeah, it was, it's a tough question. I remember that, I know that question, it's,